Hey guys, welcome to a new video of the Thirdweb SDK V5 series, and in this particular one I want to cover how you can progressively migrate from V4 SDK to the V5 SDK. Now a lot of you might be using the V4 SDK inside of your project. You might be using it for the components or the hooks or the functions that Thirdweb provides through the V4 SDK, and you might want to switch to the V5 SDK. However, you might be using a lot of the components or functions of the V4 SDK in your code base, which makes it difficult to migrate to V5 immediately. So what you can do is, while you're still figuring out how you can use V5 instead of the V4 SDK, you can in the meantime use both the SDKs together inside of your application, which means you can utilize the functions, hooks, and the components from both the V5 as well as the V4 SDK while you're still working on migrating your app fully from V4 to V5. Now the main issue with using both the versions of the SDK together is that they're both using different query clients. So for specific reason, what we can do is we can install query clients directly, and we can wrap those Thirdweb SDK providers for both the versions within the respective query clients. Now obviously, if you don't want to migrate from V4 to V5 and you're just watching this tutorial series to build your own Web3 application using V5 SDK, you can go ahead and skip this video completely and move on to the next video. And let's see how we can use both the version 4 as well as the version 5 SDK together. Okay, so as you can see, I'm inside of VS Code right now, and let's go ahead and open the terminal right over here, and let's create a new Next.js application using create next app. Let's write here npx create next app, and let's name this app progressive, or yeah, we'll just name this progressive for now, and let's hit enter. So it's now going to create all the necessary files in our folder. Let's type yes to proceed. Let's go with the default settings for now. Now it's installing all the default dev dependencies. As you can see, the new project folder has been created, and a bunch of folders and files have been created over here as well. When you go to package.json, you can find all our packages that have been installed. As you can see, it's now been successfully created, so we can go ahead and start playing around with our Next.js application. But before that, let's run the server. Let's write here and run dev, but obviously before that we need to build the application. So let's run lpm run build, but yeah, we are not inside of the project folder, so let's go ahead and cd into the project, which is progressive, and let's run npm run dev again. Now it's starting the server, and it should be done pretty soon. Now let's visit the website. Great, so our application is now set up and running. Now we can go ahead and install all the required Thirdweb dependencies. Let's first open a new terminal right over here. Or maybe we could open a bash terminal here. Great, so let's go ahead and install all the necessary dependencies. First, let's go ahead and install the Thirdweb V5 SDK, which is very simple. But first, let's go ahead and change directory to our project, which is named as progressive. Now that we are inside the project, let's install the Thirdweb V5 SDK. In order to do that, I'm going to write npm space I space Thirdweb and hit enter, which should install all the required library. It's going to take a while, so let's skip to the part where it's done installing. Great, so the Thirdweb V5 SDK is done installing, as you can see in our package.json file. we have the new packages added. You can see that the Thirdweb library is right over here. So now let's go ahead and start installing the Thirdweb v4 SDK. Now I've already copied it from the Thirdweb documentation, and I'm going to paste the packages over here. These are basically the Thirdweb v4 packages. So let's hit enter, which should install all the Thirdweb v4 packages, and let's skip to the part where it's done installing. Great, so now all the libraries of Thirdweb SDK have been installed, both the version 4 and version 5. So let's go ahead and implement Thirdweb v5 SDK into our application to verify that it's working. What we'll do is we'll go to the SRC folder, and over here we'll find that there's another app folder, and within this app folder we will look at the parent component, which over here is the layout component, because it basically wraps the entire application within its body. And over here we're going to start setting up our Thirdweb SDK provider for the Thirdweb v4 SDK. So let's go ahead and import the Thirdweb provider, and I'm going to Thirdweb provider, great, and let's wrap our entire application within the Thirdweb provider. Remember that this Thirdweb provider that we just imported is actually the Thirdweb provider from v4 SDK, and we are just checking if it's working correctly. And remember that in v4 we need to pass client ID to the Thirdweb provider, so please remember to get your client ID from the Thirdweb website. Okay, so now I have pasted in the client ID and I've passed it to the client ID prop. Let's save the file and go back to our application. And as you can see that we are being displayed an error over here, which means that we need to create a new file in order to use the provider, and we need to declare that component as use client in order to use it within our application. So let's go ahead and create a new component folder within the app folder, and let's name it as components, or better yet, we can name it as providers. And within this providers folder, we can create a new file and name it as Thirdweb provider v4.tsx. And over here, basically, all we are doing is returning the v4 Thirdweb SDK provider. The only difference is that we are going to be using the use client directive on the top. So let's write here export default function. We can name this as Thirdweb provider v4, and remember we need to pass a use client directive. So let's write here use client, which will allow us to use the Thirdweb v4 provider in our application. And let's also import the Thirdweb provider. Sorry, this is the auth provider. We need the Thirdweb provider only. And let's return the Thirdweb provider. And another thing that we need to do is pass the client ID over here. So for that, you can simply write client ID equals, I'm going to create a new environment variable where I store this client ID, and I'm going to name it as .env, and I'm going to write client underscore ID equals, and then you need to paste your ID over here. Additionally, I'm going to create a client.ts file, which will allow me to use this client ID that I've just created. So I'm going to create a new file within the SRC folder, and I'm going to name it as client.ts, and I'm going to simply export const client ID equals process.env.client underscore ID. Great, so over here I'm going to pass client ID that I have created in the client.ts file. Let's save this application. We need to define a children right inside here, and we need to define children as a react node type, because and the children that we are accepting need to go within the Thirdweb provider so that we can wrap the entire application. So let's go ahead and import the newly created Thirdweb v4 provider, and let's pass it right over here. And since we want to wrap the entire application, let's wrap the body element as well as all the children elements that need to go within the Thirdweb provider v4. Now let's go back to our application to check if we're still getting any errors. Great, so our app is not giving us any errors anymore. Let's try to see if everything is looking fine by importing a simple connect button component. But in React SDK v4, it is called the connect wallet component. So let's import that and let's place it somewhere inside of our application. And let's save this and go back to our application to see if the changes are being reflected over here. So it appears that we will need to add a use client directive. So let's go ahead and declare this component with use client directive. Boom, so you can see it just refreshed the page, and now we can connect using a bunch of different wallets. And what this means is that we have successfully integrated the v4 SDK. Now let's go ahead and do the same for the v5 SDK. We're going to create a new file for the Thirdweb v5 SDK. Let's name it as Thirdweb provider v5.tsx. Since most of the code is going to be the same, I'm just going to copy our code for v4 and paste it here. But obviously we need to import the Thirdweb provider from the Thirdweb v5 package. So let's write import Thirdweb provider, and we need to select the option for v5, which is the Thirdweb/React library. And obviously the Thirdweb v5 provider does not accept any client, so we're going to remove that as well. Let's go ahead and start using both the providers inside of our application. Let's go back to our layout.tsx file, and let's import the Thirdweb provider v. Okay, it seems that we forgot to change the name of the function, so let's name it as v5 so that we can import it as Thirdweb provider v5. Great, so let's wrap the application with our Thirdweb provider v5. Now let's save the file. Okay, so another thing that you need to know about using both these Thirdweb providers, as I mentioned earlier, is that both of these Thirdweb providers are using different query clients, which means that in the file where we have initialized both of these providers, we also need to pass separate query clients. Both the Thirdweb providers cannot be used together. So if you try importing a different component from Thirdweb v5, it's not going to work because it's going to give you a query client error. This is happening because we are using different query clients for both the Thirdweb providers, and the solution to this is to use different query clients for each provider separately. That way we will be able to use all the features from both the Thirdweb providers. And this is thanks to the Thirdweb team that was able to help me in figuring out how we can implement progressive migration for Next.js applications. So a huge thanks to them for helping me figure out how to do this. And let's go ahead and start installing some of the query clients that we need in order to make both the SDKs work together. So let's go ahead and install the DanStack/React query version 4. I'm going to write npm space I space DanStack/React query, and then we need to specify the version, which is 4. Let's hit enter and allow it to install. As you can see, it has already been added to our package.json file, which is great. Now another package that we need to install is the DanStack React Query version 5 package, so that we can use it for our Thirdweb v5 provider. Now I'm going to write npm space I space DanStack -v5. That's the name that I'm giving it. There's a spelling mistake. Okay. DanStack -v5 is the alias name that I'm giving to the v5, to the version 5 of DanStack/React Query package. Now let's write @npm, then colon, and again @. Now we write the name of the package, which in our case is DanStack/React Query. Now we need the latest package, so I'll write @latest and hit enter. As you can see here that it is now installing the DanStack React Query version 5 as mentioned over here, and the name, which is the alias that we have given to this package, is mentioned over here. Now we can go ahead and import the both the query clients into our respective Thirdweb provider files. Now in the case of the Thirdweb v5 provider, we can go ahead and write import query client, and we get the option to import it from Thirdweb v5, which is the alias that is specified. Now what we need to do is we need to wrap our Thirdweb provider with the query client. Now after importing the query client, you need to import the query client provider, which is this. Let's go ahead and initialize the query client. Const query client equals and let's save the file. Now let's pass this query client that we have created to the query client provider. But first let's wrap this with within parentheses. Now let's write a query client provider, which needs to wrap the Thirdweb SDK, the Thirdweb v5 provider. Great. So now let's pass in the client, which is the query client that we initialized above, and let's save this file. Let's go ahead and do that the same. Let's do the same thing for the Thirdweb v4 provider. Let's import the query client, but this time the query client will come from DanStack/React Query, which you remember is the version 4 React Query. So it's the old one, which is compatible with the Thirdweb provider v4. And let's also import the query client provider, which will wrap our Thirdweb v4 provider. Let's initialize query client. Great. And let's wrap our Thirdweb v4 provider with the query client provider. And let's pass the query client. Great. Now that we have saved the file, let's go ahead and start using the different components from Thirdweb v4 and v5 to verify that we are able to use the power of both the SDKs inside of our application. Let's go to our page.tsx component, and over here I'm going to, as you remember, we imported the connect wallet to see if it was working from Thirdweb v4 SDK, and this is the button over here, and it seems to be working perfectly. We are able to connect to our wallet and look at different information. So let's do the same thing for the Connect v5 SDK now. Let's import the Connect button component to check if it's working. Great, so let's import and use that Connect button component. Connect button. Remember that in the case of v5 we have to pass a client, so let's pass a client, and we have defined the client ID in the client.ts file. Okay, in the case of Thirdweb v5 you need to pass a Thirdweb client object, so you need to create a client over here. Let's do that really quick. Create Thirdweb client and export const. Let's name it client v5. Create Thirdweb client, and we need to pass the client ID over here. We can pass it this one. Let's write as any to disable type checking, and over here instead of the client ID we can import client v5, and I'm going to hit enter, which should automatically import it for me. And let's also add some text so that we can differentiate between the two buttons. This is the v4 button. Great. Now let's see if our application is working. You'll notice that there is some kind of error, and when you inspect in your DevTools, you'll find that it says client ID or secret key must be provided, and there's a weird bug here that basically means that you'll need to pass your client ID as a string here. I know it's a little bit awkward, but this is the way to make it work with v4 SDK. So go ahead and pass in your client ID as a string to this create Thirdweb client. Great. So once you have done that, now I'm back in the page in our page file. Let's save the file and go back to our application to see if the changes are taking place or not. I'm going to refresh again. As you can see, both the buttons are loading. Great. So now we can see both the buttons, both the v4 as well as the v5 SDK buttons visible on our application. Now let's try using these components. Let's try connecting to our wallet using the v4 component. Great, so it's working. Now let's do the same for our v5 component. I'm going to choose a wallet. Great, so both the buttons are working, which is great, and this means that you can use both the v4 as well as v5 SDKs together inside of your application. Thanks a lot for watching this video, guys. I hope that you found this useful, and if you want to learn more about the Thirdweb v5 SDK, feel free to check out more videos. I'm uploading them constantly, and I hope to cover as many topics as I possibly can from the v5 documentation. And if you found this useful, please like and subscribe, and join my Discord channel if you have any questions. If you want to see the code that was written in this tutorial, then you can find it in the GitHub link that I will leave in the comment below. I'm going to pin the comment, so don't worry about not being able to find it. And thanks a lot for watching this video. Hope to see you again in the next one.